Hello, and welcome to another episode in the Dangerboys podcast series. My name is Tappers, and today we're going to be talking about the Battle of Shiloh. So just a quick little tidbit before we get into the Battle of Shiloh from the American Civil War. Just a quick little life update, I suppose. So I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded a podcast episode, and I've just been really busy. That's been a big factor, and I've also just kind of been finding my own different hobbies and whatnot. So like I said, I'm working on a new podcast episode. Going to be focusing on the French Revolution and Napoleon Bonaparte and kind of what happened with his whole regime and the downfall of Napoleon and et cetera, et cetera. That's proving to be a bit of a long and arduous project that I've been working on for probably about the last 6 months. Have been kind of consumed by this. So in the meantime, I figured, well, hey, I was just given a really nice donation of several books on the Civil War. And I came across the Battle of Shiloh, and I said, hey, you know what? I haven't talked about Shiloh yet. Let's just start working on the slides, and next thing you know, I think I'm done with it. So I'm going to do this recording, and if I like the way that it turns out, I'll end up publishing it. And if not, I'll do a second take and whatever. But anyways, so the Battle of Shiloh. Okay, let's kind of set this up. So in my podcast series so far, we've talked about Manassas, the first Battle of Manassas or Bull Run. We've talked about Fredericksburg and Gettysburg. We haven't really talked about anything in the West, though. So all of those battles, Fredericksburg, Manassas, Gettysburg, that all happened in the East. And this is one of the first battles that I'm going to be talking about in this podcast series that take place in the West, or the Western Theater, or the armies that are involved in the Western Theater, because a lot of this happens in Georgia and South Carolina and Tennessee. And you can kind of count Tennessee as the West for our purposes today. But it's going to be Ulysses S. Grant in 1862 before he takes over command of the Army in Virginia in the summer of 63, or the fall to winter of 63 into the spring of 64. Whenever Grant takes control of the East, he's still in the West in 62. Vicksburg, the Battle of Vicksburg has not happened yet. And I don't think the the 7 days battle with General Lee, I don't believe has happened yet. So Shiloh is early on in the war. But as we're going to see, this is one of the first times that a major Union unit and a major Confederate unit meet in battle. And so I think that's enough preamble, I think. Kind of setting up where we are, and we're just going to kind of get into it. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. All right. So, the Union forces, right? So, what do the Union forces want to do in the early spring of 1862? Well, very simply, what they want to do is they want to add pressure to Southern infrastructure. Right, the North wants to put pressure on railroads and farms and ports for sea and whatnot. The Union wants to start to put pressure on those on those areas of Southern infrastructure, specifically the railroads. So, the first goal of the Union forces is to clear Middle Tennessee of Confederate forces. Right, so the state of Tennessee is one of those in-between states as far as being for the Confederacy and being for the Union. There's a lot of Union support in Tennessee. There's a lot of Confederate support as well, but there's a lot of Tennessee support as well. So the North, the Federals, want to try to get every single Confederate out of Tennessee that they can and try to change it back over to a Union-only state. Once they do that, once they clear out Middle Tennessee, the Union Army wants to march on to Savannah, right? Savannah, Georgia. And then once they reach Savannah, Georgia, they're going to push into Mississippi and disrupt the rail hub in Corinth. Okay, so Corinth, Mississippi is a major rail hub for the entire Southern Confederacy, right? Like a lot of supplies, a lot of troops, a lot of ammunition, everything that an army needs to stay provisioned is going to come through Corinth, a lot of it. And so the Union wants to get down to Corinth, Mississippi, destroy it, destroy the rail hub, and prevent the South from using Corinth as a supply depot, right? So who do we have in charge? We have Major General Henry Wagner Halleck. He is the commanding general who is in charge of everything west of the Mississippi, basically. And under his command, specifically, is going to be Major General Ulysses S. Grant. His Army of the Tennessee, which has about 42,000 people, 42,000 men. And then the other major army under the command of Henry Halleck is going to be Major General Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio, which has about 20,000 men. So between Grant's Army of the Tennessee and Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio, they have about 62,000 men in total. And these are the forces that have been fighting in the West, fighting over the Tennessee River, fighting over the Mississippi River. And we'll come back to Grant in a later podcast episode as far as what the Army of the Tennessee was up to, what the Army of the Ohio was doing. Like I said, after this is Vicksburg and New Orleans, and there's a lot of really interesting things going on with Grant in the West in the early stages of the war. But for the time being, and to get us through this podcast episode, is going to be this Army of the Tennessee with 42,000 men in it, and Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio with 20,000. So like I said, 62,000 men combined between both armies. Now, the Battle of Shiloh takes place in early April. And this is kind of setting up for what's going to be happening in April. So March 14th, right, Brigadier General William Tecumseh Sherman, who is famous from his Sherman's March to the Sea. This is going to be the same Sherman that's going to burn the South to the ground and et cetera, later on in the war. Right now, however, he's just a brigadier general under Halleck. And so he arrives in the area of Savannah and Corinth. He's in that southern region of Mississippi and Georgia, right on the border of Tennessee. And Wagner comes up to Sherman and says, hey, look, we want to start moving our army around a little bit. We need you to start doing some reconnaissance for us. There's a place called Eastport. We want you to go and check out Eastport, see what's going on there, give us a good report of what's happening in Eastport. And so Sherman does. He gets on a boat, the gunboat Tyler. That's the name of the ship, or like I said, it's a gunboat. It's not really a ship, but the name of the gunboat is the Tyler. He sets sail and starts sailing north, up towards Eastport. And on the way, he passes by Pittsburgh Landing. And in Pittsburgh Landing is he spots a small Confederate artillery force that has taken Pittsburgh Landing, that kind of occupies it. And he says, hey, this is a really good ground. This is ground that the Union should be controlling. I'm going to send word back to Wagner that we should deploy a force out to Pittsburgh Landing in order to hold it, to keep the Confederates, right, from taking it. So, like I said, he sends word to the Union forces that they should be deployed at Pittsburgh Landing. And the 4th Division, under Brigadier General Stephen Hulbert, is then assigned to occupy Pittsburgh Landing. Sherman continues on to Eastport. On his way back, he realizes that an area called Shiloh Church, which is about 3 miles away from Pittsburgh Landing, is a better spot for the army to set up because it is closer to Corinth, which, if we go back to the original goals of the Union Army, it is to push into Mississippi and disrupt the rail hub in Corinth. So if they want to attack Corinth, the idea is to get closer from Pittsburgh Landing, move from Pittsburgh Landing to Shiloh, and then from Shiloh to Corinth. So Sherman, as he's being deployed as a scout, he sees that Shiloh is a better landing spot for the army, and so that's where he thinks that the army should go, and Wagner listens to him. Let's look at the Confederate forces, right? So the North wants to continue the pressure, wants to continue the momentum of kicking out the Confederates from Tennessee. The North wants to build on its victories in the West. It wants to continue its pressure, right? And what the South wants to do. The South desperately needs to turn things around in the West, right? They have been on the back foot. They have been losing for too long. It is time for the Confederate Army in the West to take a stand and to push Grant back and to start going back into Tennessee to retake the land that the Union had taken over, right? So there's a fort, I believe it is called Fort Henry, that fell shortly before the Battle of Shiloh, about a month before. And so the Confederates want to retake Fort Henry. They want to retake Nashville. Nashville, Tennessee is another major Confederate population base. Very important for rails, for shipping, for everything that the South needs to do to provision its armies. Nashville helps out in that a lot. And so the Confederates want to go and take back Tennessee, including, but not limited to, Nashville. So General Albert Sidney Johnston, right? He is the commanding general of all of the troops west of the Mississippi, right? He's the commanding general in the West. Pulls together as many forces as he can from all over the Confederacy, including Florida, New Orleans, and South Carolina, demonstrating efficient use of inferior rail lines. So if we go back to the very beginning of the war, and we were to look at advantages and disadvantages that the North and the South had over each other, right? One of the big advantages that the North had, and one of the biggest disadvantages that the South had, was rail networks, right? The North had very good rail networks. They had foundries, and they had the manufacturing capacity to make new rails and to replace old, worn-out rails. The South did not have this capacity. They did not have the capability of creating new rail lines, or in the case of the Union Army destroying rail lines, they did not have the Confederacy. The Confederacy did not have the capacity to fix broken rail lines, right? And so while they have the rail lines before they're destroyed, General Albert Sidney Johnston does a very good job of using the rail network to get as many troops as he can into Corinth, Mississippi, to build up a defense against Grant, right? And Buell, right? And Halleck. Halleck is the one who's in, we think about General Grant, as the Union man of all Union men, very much the same way we think of Lee. But at this point in time, Lee is not in charge of the armies, right? Lee is not the grand general that we think of him today, and neither is Grant. There are people in charge of these, of Grant and of Lee. So anyways, Sidney Johnston, like I said, uses the rail network very efficiently to pull together about 40,000 men. And again, if we remember, that's about as many men as Grant has in his army, right? And that's not even with Buell. Buell has another 20,000 on top of that. So the South is at a significant disadvantage when it comes to troop numbers, but they are for the entire war, and that should not be it should not be looked upon as, oh, okay, well, the South had half as many men as the North, therefore the South was immediately going to lose. That's not what happens in a lot of battles. The Union Army will show up with 100,000 men, and the South will show up with 60,000, and the South will take the lead or they'll win the battle. It's something that we see over and over and over again. So don't just look at Sidney Johnson's 40,000 men and say, okay, this was automatically a defeat. It was not. It was not necessarily that way. But so the South gets together these 40,000 men. They all group up in Corinth, Mississippi, and the plan. So the plan with these 40,000 men, Johnston, he wants to move north and intercept Grant. So Buell and Grant are not on top of each other, right? There is significant time. Grant arrives in Corinth before Buell does, right? And so there is a time period of 4 or 5 days where Grant is by himself and he's waiting for Buell to arrive. And so Johnston's idea is that we're going to march north as quickly as possible. We are going to try to intercept Grant, and we are going to try to get Grant to either withdraw, surrender, whatever we can do to put Grant at a disadvantage before Buell gets there. And then Buell will arrive after we've already dealt with Grant, and then we will knock out Buell like we knocked out Grant, and then we will move into Tennessee, and we will take Nashville back from the Federals, right? That is Johnston's plan. That is the Confederates' plan. We want to take out Grant, take out Buell, go towards Tennessee, liberate Nashville. Those are the very simple plans and the ideas and the foundation of what PGT Beauregard and General Albert Sidney Johnston are going to try to do going into Corinth, Mississippi. But we'll see here that there's a few problems with this plan. All right. So we were in March, right? We were at March 14th. William Tecumseh Sherman is going up and down the Tennessee River trying to figure out where the Confederates are and whatever. Now we jump ahead to April 3rd, 1862. Okay, so, almost a whole month. So, like I said, Albert Sidney Johnston's plan is on the 3rd of April, we are going to begin moving north, right? As our 40,000 men are going to start moving north. Going to take us a whole day to get there. By April 4th, by the end of April 4th, we should reach where Grant is in his defensive lines, and we should be able to begin to assault him. Now, the most important part of the Confederate plan is speed, right? So Grant is marching south towards Corinth, and the idea is that Beauregard and Johnston are going to surprise Grant on the morning or at the evening of April 4th and on the beginning of April 5th. We're going to surprise Grant. We are going to whip him before he has a chance to be reinforced by Buell, and we're going to knock him out, right? That's the key, the speed of it, how fast we're going to get from Corinth up to Shiloh. The frontal assault would be the main engagement strategy, right? So we talked about this. If you go back and listen to the first Battle of Bull Run, you go back and listen to Fredericksburg, you go back and listen to Gettysburg, there's something that I harp on over and over and over and over and over again. The way to win a Civil War battle is to outflank your enemy, right? You want to get onto the extreme left to the extreme right, one of those two, and you want to try to get around your enemy and start shooting him in the back. That is the goal of almost every single, it should be the goal of every single Civil War army, is to flank your enemy and overwhelm them. The problem is that Grant is very protected, right? He has the river, and Beauregard knew and Johnston knew that trying to get around to the right or to the left is going to be extremely difficult. And so a frontal assault really would be the only open strategy to them. So that's their plan, right? We're gonna reach Grant by the end of the 4th of April. We're gonna be fast as hell getting across the land in order to get to Grant. We're gonna stack up in the middle, and we're gonna launch ourselves right down Grant's throat until he can't handle it anymore and he gives up. There's a lot of problems with this plan. Before they even started marching, there was a lot of problems with this plan. And we're going to go over most of the issues that the Confederates had. So the first issue, most Confederate troops had never seen combat. These 40,000 men that are fighting for Johnston, like I said, are coming up from Florida, South Carolina, out in the West, New Orleans. A lot of these places had not had combat yet, right? Florida, there are no major battles fought in Florida, especially this early in the war, but in the course of the entire war, there's no major battles fought in Florida. New Orleans, which would be a major focus point in a couple months from now, and we're in April 3rd of 1862. By the time August and late September hit in 1862, or New Orleans would be a major focal point. But a lot of these troops that are being sent up to reinforce and to make up the bulk of this army that Johnston is putting together have never seen combat. And that means they've never been drilled before. Okay, so drill. In Civil War terms, right, and you could think about it, you think about modern day, right, your drill instructor, that guy who yells in your face with his, wide-brimmed hat or whatever, calling you scum or whatever. That is very similar to what's happening in the Civil War, okay? Because, yeah, they're trying to break you down or whatever, but it's also bugle calls. One of the main ways that the Army, communicates with itself is through signals with flags. A flag, there'll be a man with two flags, and he raises up his left arm and he puts his right arm out to the side or whatever. That means something. Two arms up in the air, that means something. The musket blast, whatever, that means something, and you have to teach that. You have to teach what that means. Whenever you hear that the bugle call go off, you have to know, okay, are we retreating? Are we pushing forward? Are we swinging to the right? Are we swinging to the left? What are we doing? And a lot of these guys that made up this army of Confederates had no idea what any of that was. And a lot of them had never shot a musket. Now, I don't think I need to emphasize how important it is that if your army or the troops that make up your army have not shot a musket before, how detrimental that will be to your end goals and to your campaign in general. And so that was three major issues that Beauregard and Johnston are going to run into. Another thing as well, these men are undisciplined, right? So they're walking along the road from Corinth, Mississippi, up to Shiloh. The men in the Confederate Army would stop and they would shoot deer. They would just pull out their muskets and take a bunch of shots at deer. They would practice their rebel yells, or whatever the hell they were yelling. They would they would practice that while they were walking along the road on their way to Shiloh. And again, going back to the beginning, right, the Confederate troops, they would march north on the 3rd. They would get there by the 4th. Well, the 3rd goes by, the 4th goes by, and most of the 5th of April goes by before the Confederate Army is ready to be in position. Now, Grant has had ample time to dig in, to make himself feel comfortable in his position, and with the Confederate Army making as much noise as it has, shooting off their rifles, yelling at the top of their lungs, you would think that Grant would be prepared and the troops would be in a strong defensive position ready for the Confederates to show up. That is not the case. We will see that in a little bit. But that being said, Beauregard noticed the danger, right? Beauregard said to Sidney Johnson, he said, hey, we have gotten here too late. We were supposed to be here 2 days ago. We have failed in that objective. We should back up We should return back to Corinth, Mississippi, and we should set up defensive lines because this attack just isn't going to work. Now, Albert Sidney Johnston was not to be dissuaded. He overruled Johnston. Now, don't forget, Johnston is in charge of Beauregard, right? It's Johnston. Under Johnston is Beauregard. Under Beauregard, et cetera, et cetera. So Johnston said, hey, no, we're going to attack anyways. And I quote, I would fight them if they were 1,000,000, right? So Albert Sidney Johnston's going to put his foot in the ground and he's going to say, no, we are tired of losing in the West. I am tired of being beat by Grant and all these other Union generals. We're going to take a stand here and now, and we are going to fight them no matter what. And so Beauregard obviously falls in line with his commanding officer, and on the morning of April the 6th, they prepare for their assaults against the Union position. So, April 6th, right? The morning of April 6th, again, I was talking about how this army under Beauregard and Johnston was shooting off their muskets, yelling at the top of their lungs, being not very quiet at all. Grant should have had so much time and opportunity and known exactly what the Confederates were going to do. However, he did not. There's a lot of people to blame. Grant himself, but also his commanding generals, and there's a lot of a very relaxed vibe, I think, is kind of what the Army was under at the time, the Army of the Tennessee, because again, like I said, they were winning a lot of battles in the West. And whenever you're on top for as long as the Army of Tennessee was, I think there can be a bit of not lackadaisicalness, but this sort of confidence of, well, we're the baddest army around and no one can beat us, therefore we don't have to keep our guard up all the time. Well, like I said, the Army of Tennessee was caught literally with their pants down in some cases. So in the early morning of April 6th, the Confederate attack caught the Federals by surprise. Many of the Federals were cooking their breakfast or getting out of bed or putting on their clothes. And next thing you know, a armed militia of Confederates come running through your camp. And this caused a lot of disruption. Grant was in a very serious, very, very, very serious bind here. We know how the war went. We know how it ended. We know that this eventually leads to Gettysburg and whatever. That being said, we should not understate how dangerous of a position this was for Grant. With half of his army, like I said, unprepared, in their underwear, running from the Confederate forces, this could have been a major, major, major disaster for Grant and the Army of Tennessee. However, that being said, Grant was able to get a hold on things fairly quickly. He was able to organize his troops. And so this part of this wing, I suppose I'll say, the wing of the Army of Tennessee that was snuck up on, was not snuck up on for very long. In that Grant was able to organize them and set up a defense with their backs basically to the Tennessee River. So Grant is pushed back to the Tennessee River. He has really nowhere to retreat. He is stuck with the Tennessee River behind him and the Confederates in front of him. So with these Confederate troops rushing up and over towards Grant's position, more and more and more Confederates are kind of fed into this. Slaughter pen gets used a lot. In this version of the slaughter pen or whatever you want to call it, this is called the Hornet's Nest, where in the very center of the Union line, there is a very strong defense put up by a few federal troops. There's a few brigades in the center that are just refusing to break. They're refusing to fall. And so as the North is, some of them are freaking out. Like I said, some of them are still in their underwear, whatever. as they're trying to get a hold of their situation, they turn around and they look to the center, and there's this very strong, very resilient group of Union combatants that are holding their ground, refusing to fall away. And so the Union rallies on this point in the middle, the Hornet's Nest. The Federals rally on the Hornet's Nest and hold their ground and begin to fight off the Confederate assault. So again, the Confederates' idea is to attack in the center. And so more and more Confederate men are fed into the center because that's where Beauregard and Johnston want to make their main assault, right into what we call the Hornet's Nest, where they are, destroyed, is kind of one way to put it. So the left flank of the Union Army at this point is very, very weak. Very weak. Very weak. The left flank of the Union Army could have and should have been pushed out into the open. So I was going to get more maps and whatnot, but I decided just to push through with the way this all came out. So I want you to picture in your mind, right? Grant is next to a riverbank, right? His back is to the riverbank. In front of him is the Confederates. If the Confederates had come around from the left and pushed, well, it would have been the Confederate right, the Union left, right? It's backwards. Because if we're looking at it from the Confederate perspective, it would be the Confederate right, the Union left. If the Confederates had pushed their position down on the right side, the Union's left, the Confederate right, and swung them around. So again, you picture in your mind Grant, his back against the water, and we're going to swing him around all the way to the left and push him out away from the river. Because Buell, Don Carlos Buell and his 20,000 men are on the other side of the river. And so getting Grant away from the river so that way Buell cannot sail or, it wouldn't really be sailing. It'd be more, ferrying. He can't ferry his troops across the Tennessee River if he doesn't have a place to land, right? And so if you push out the right, on the Confederate right, the Union left, and you push Grant back out into the wilderness, out into the woods and the fields of Shiloh, then Buell will not be able to get across the river. That being said, yes, the Union could have broken on the right. They did not. That flank was not pushed by the Confederates as hard as it should have been, could have been. I'll say how as hard as it could have been because of the chain of command. Okay? So around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Hornet's Nest is still very much alive. The Hornet's Nest is still putting up a tremendous fight. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Albert Sidney Johnston is shot in the leg right above the boot, and his artery in his leg, his leg artery, was severed, and he quickly bled out. So Albert Sidney Johnston is dead. He is on the right side of the Confederate line, the left side of the Union line. He would have been the main factor in the Confederates pushing that side of the line and getting around Grant and pushing him back into the wilderness. Well, Johnston dies, and so momentum and morale, Johnston was admired by his men. The men have very fond things to say of Johnston. Johnston dies, and so for a short period of time, for a couple hours, there is a lot of confusion as far as who is giving orders, who is authorized to give orders. The answer is Beauregard. Beauregard is allowed to give those orders, but he doesn't necessarily know that Johnston is dead yet. It takes him, a couple hours before he finds out that he is the one who is inevitably in charge of this entire army. So, the attack kind of falls off a little bit. Beauregard, while he's taking over command, the Confederate assaults kind of stop. They slacken a little bit. But 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, Beauregard realizes that he is in charge, and the Confederate assaults begin anew. The Hornet's Nest, which is stood up all day from the early morning until the late afternoon, is finally broken up after artillery fire kind of decimates this Hornet's Nest. The Confederates move in. They capture thousands of hostages, POWs, and are able to finally get past that Hornet's Nest. That being said, Grant had already moved back a considerable distance closer towards Pittsburgh Landing and set up a well-entrenched, well-fortified defensive position. The Hornet's Nest is finally taken care of, but it is too late. Grant has already redeployed himself and is in very, very good position. So after the Hornet's Nest breaks, after Beauregard realizes that it's going to be extremely difficult to push Grant in his current position, Beauregard calls off the attacks. He says, "All right, that's enough. We'll resume this in the morning." Well, later on that day and into the night, Don Carlos Buell arrives to reinforce Grant. Like I said, Grant was on one side of the river, Buell was on the other side of the river, and the fact that the Confederates had not pushed Grant off of the river meant that Grant was able to secure a landing post where Buell could land his men, ferry them over, and he did that throughout the night of the 6th into the early morning of the 7th. Grant, and this is something we have to talk about here, in that early morning assault on April 6th, in the very early morning whenever Grant was surprised and his army was surprised, Grant lost thousands of men, tens of thousands of men just disappeared, whether they were captured by Confederates, whether they started running home and just didn't stop running, whatever reason they were disrupted, he lost a very considerable amount of Union forces. And in the future, as we begin to look at other battles and whatnot, I think that it'll become more clear over time. But for right now, I want to reinforce and to instate as much as I can, there are not a lot of Union commanders who would have done what Grant did. Losing half of your force and then standing there and continuing to defend is not something that everyone in the Union Army, very, very few men in the Union Army would have been capable of doing. Many of them would have cut and run. They would have said, okay, this is a lost cause. We need to turn around and run away. Grant did not do that. He rallied his men. He did not panic. He stood his ground. He built strong defensive works, and he held on because he knew that Buell was coming up behind him and would have him reinforced. This is one of those moments. Vicksburg's another moment. There's several other moments in the West, predating everything that happened in the East with Lee and Grant. Before Grant was Ulysses S. Grant, there are a lot of things that he does that shows you that Grant will be one of the most, if not the most, important person in the entire Civil War. And this is one of those moments. Grant's back is against the wall. He is pushed back further and further. His army is at the point of breaking, and he does not break. He holds on. And so that's something that I really want to iterate, just how brilliant Grant was in maintaining order, maintaining discipline, and holding his ground. So that's April 6th, right? And like I said, at the end of the day, Buell arrives. So the Army of the Tennessee, which was at 42,000 men before the morning of April 6th, was probably somewhere in the range of 30,000 to 28,000 men by the end of April 6th, because again, a lot of them left. 10,000 men or so left. Well, 20,000 men just arrived from Buell's division, and Buell is fresh, right? The Army of the Ohio has not fought in a while, And so you have 20,000 fresh federal troops arriving to Shiloh, or Pittsburgh's Landing, as the battle is also known, the Battle of Pittsburgh's Landing. Let's see, where's my mouse? I found it there for a second, then it disappeared again. There it is. All right. So, April 7th. Okay, Buell. So, Buell moves his men across the Tennessee River by night, right? So, over the course of the night, Buell moves his men in to reinforce Grant. They become one giant, big, happy family. Beauregard is constantly looking around him, hoping that Confederate reinforcements would arrive at some point. There are Confederate troops and Confederate armies that are out there, and Beauregard is hoping, beyond hope, that someone will eventually arrive to reinforce him and allow him to kind of maintain the momentum that he has built up. Because again, he had Grant on the run the first day. Yes, he lost a lot of men trying to get rid of that hornet's nest. No, he did not clear Grant out of the battlefield. He did not completely push Grant off the field. But if Beauregard thinks that if he can get another 10,000, another 15, another 20,000 men, Beauregard is very confident that he can win. And so Beauregard continues to look around him, hoping for support, hoping for reinforcements. Overnight and into the early morning, Beauregard holds out hope that someone will be arriving to help him. They do not show up. Beauregard is on his own. The Confederate strength was low, right? So all day on the 6th of April, they are sent in against that hornet's nest. They are sent in on assault after assault after assault. Their fighting power, the actual men that they have in the field, is significantly lower than it was on the 5th of April. Their morale is low, right? Their commanding general, Johnston is dead. The man that was leading them into battle, the man that had the plan. He had the idea of going and beating up Grant, beating up Buell, going back to Nashville. He is a leader. He is a beacon of hope within the Army. He is now dead. Now it is Beauregard. And so Confederate strength is low. Their fighting ability is low. Their morale is low. And to add on to all of that, like we were talking about a little bit ago, Buell's 20,000 men just arrived to the field. And these are fresh federal men. These are men that have not been fighting for the last 2 days. And so this has really become a very, very uphill battle for Beauregard very quickly. So from Grant's fortified position that he has established over the course of the afternoon and the night of 6th and the 7th of April, Grant orders counterattacks, right? So the Confederates came up and attacked us. Well, we're going to go and do the same thing to them. We're going to go backwards and we're going to start attacking the Confederates and try to regain the ground that we lost on the 6th. And they do. Grant orders these assaults, orders these attacks. And very quickly, the Union is able to reach out, spread its arms, spread its wings, and take back the land that they had lost the day before when Johnston and Beauregard surprised them. So Beauregard is already confused. His army, his men are already confused on their front lines as the battle starts on April 7th. And the Union is coming in waves and waves and waves and waves. And Beauregard quickly realizes that it is fruitless to try to hold this ground. He continues to look around him to try and find someone who was going to come up and support him. He realizes that reinforcements were not going to be showing up anytime soon. And with his inability to stop the Union assaults, Beauregard decided to abandon the field. He decides to take his ball and go home. Well, not quite home. He's going to go to Corinth, Mississippi, and he's going to hold Corinth, Mississippi for as long as he can. So, the first day is the big day, right? The second day isn't as much, but they're still fighting. There's still losses. But long story short, Buell shows up, and Beauregard doesn't have a chance. All right, so we're already towards the end of this podcast episode. We're going to go over the results of Shiloh and what it meant for the Union, what it meant for the Confederacy, and how it played into their overall strategy for the rest of the war. Shiloh is the largest engagement in American history. American history. That goes back to the colonials. That goes back to Plymouth Rock, right? All the way up through the Mexican War, all the way up to every single battle of the Civil War that predates Shiloh. If you added up every single casualty from every single battle of the French Revolution, or the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, all of those battles, every single one added up together would not reach the amount of people who died in these 2 days in Shiloh. It can be kind of difficult to kind of wrap our heads around just how large this battle was in the terms of losses for both sides. 24,000, 25,000. We look at Gettysburg. Gettysburg had 50,000. We look at World War II, and you had over 400,000, almost 500,000 American lives lost. But for the American people living in 1800s North America, living in Pennsylvania, New York, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, these numbers are staggering. They are unimaginable. Up until this point in the war, right, where we're talking about early 1862, right, a total of 10,000 lost would have been a lot on both sides. Both sides combined, 10,000 would have been a lot. The fact that the Confederates lost almost 11,000 people on their own is staggering. And whenever this popped up in Confederate newspapers, when this popped up in Union papers, there was a very quick realization on both sides that this was not going to be a small war. This was not going to be a bunch of battles of Manassas. Like I said, go back and listen to Manassas. Earlier episode I did. Go back and listen to the first Battle of Manassas. People were under the impression that was going to be every battle. 1,000 people, 2,000, 5,000 at the most. They were not expecting. They were not ready for 20,000. They were not ready for 30,000 in 2 days of battle. Which again, and I know I keep harping on about this, but the idea that every single battle, every single life lost in the Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, every single life lost in every single one of those wars does not compare to just 2 days. Just 2 days of fighting at Shiloh. So again, like I said, the people in the North, the people in the South were shocked. They were in awe. They were devastated by the amount of sacrifice that was needed from both sides. Absolute shock and awe. And this is a medium-sized battle compared to later battles in the Civil War, which, like I said, and I keep harping on about it. I keep saying it. I'm going to keep saying it because I think it is that important, and it is that important to try to realize just how big this was, what this meant for civilian populations, and what it was going to mean for the rest of the war. And speaking of the rest of the war, so the Confederates fell back to Corinth, Mississippi. They lost their chance to retake Tennessee, and they never would again, ever have the chance to take back Tennessee from the Union, right? This is an opportunity that would have been major for the South, for the Confederacy, to take back Tennessee and they would never again have a chance to take back Nashville. They would never again have a chance to get back into Tennessee and to dominate control of Tennessee. It was just not possible. And again, from what we'll see in later podcast episodes, we will talk about Vicksburg. We will talk about New Orleans. Very quickly after this, New Orleans fell. Vicksburg would be afterwards. And this is absolutely devastating for the Confederacy in the West. Absolutely devastating. To the point where it almost doesn't recover. Now, again, the Confederacy would go on to fight for another 3 years. But I think it kind of speaks for itself in the fact that the Confederates were never able to get back into Tennessee. Not even put up a good fight in Tennessee. Not even, though they had 3 or 4 more battles in Tennessee, there was 2 or 3 battles in, Nashville that allowed them to kind of fight back off the ropes. They were never back in Tennessee at all. And so I hope that the Battle of Shiloh kind of cements in your head, 1, that this was not going to be an ordinary war, and 2, the overwhelming power of the North to inflict its will on the South was a major contributing factor as to why the Union ended up winning the war. And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. That's all I got. As long as you got that, as long as you have that Shiloh was extremely devastating for both populations, and that the war was changing visibly, then I think we're all good here. Oh man, so like I said, that was Shiloh, man. I'm gonna listen back to this at the end of this. About an hour and a half? No, yeah, about an hour long. I'm going to listen to this a couple times, make sure I like the way the audio turned out. If I didn't like it, I'll re-record it, but I'm going to guess based off of how that went. I'm just going to upload it straight to YouTube. I'm working on a project, like I said, Napoleon Bonaparte. That's Italian, not French. Anyways, Jesus. I'm working on that Napoleon series. Starting with the French Revolution and then all the way up through, Napoleon's exile to Alba and, what was the other one? Alba and, as he came back from Elba. He came back from Elba, took over command again. And, St. Helena. That's it. St. Helena. So like I say, going over from the French Revolution all the way up to St. Helena. Now, this was very quick. This Battle of Shiloh. It was a very quick recording session for me. It was a very quick putting it together. I did it in about an afternoon. And I'm already up to an hour long, which is about twice as long as I was hoping to go with this. I was hoping I'd be out in 25 minutes on the Battle of Shiloh. And obviously that's not the case, which scares me even more for the French Revolution and Napoleon and what happened in Napoleon. His empire and his reign and everything. That's going to be like a 6-hour podcast episode, and I really don't want to go that long. And so I have no idea when Napoleon's going to be out. I might even do 3 or 4 more Civil War battles. Like I said, I got a very generous donation of several Civil War books that have been immense in helping me research what I need to research for this. And so I'll probably go back to those. Like I said, I'm probably about halfway done, if not quite halfway, maybe a quarter of the way done with the Napoleon episode. So yeah, I said, just keep on keeping on. Subscribe, like, comment, right? God, I should have put that in the beginning of the video. I'm gonna have to record this whole thing just because I didn't say like, comment, and subscribe at the beginning of it. But anyway, seriously though, that really, 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 really does help me. It makes all the difference in the world. Like, comment, and subscribing. It's such a simple, quick thing to do. It doesn't have to be anything relevant. Just comment, just put a blurb, put random letters and numbers, and just hit post. It will make a difference to me, I promise. Even if it doesn't make a difference to you. But yeah, so that's everything I wanted to say. Like I said, just looking out in the future for different podcast episodes I'm going to be doing. Like I said, I'm going to try to get back into doing the Napoleon series. In between then, like I said, I'm going to try to do, I want to do the Battle of 7 Days, the 7 Days Battle, which is very important in the history of Lee, General Lee, and what Lee wants to do for the entirety of the war. Very, very important that I believe we cover the 7 days, which, like I said, is really Lee coming into his own. It's really General Lee beginning the myth, I suppose, of General Lee. You know, when you think of General Lee, he is, you know, this kind of massive presence. I'm sorry, I wanted to put on some jazz music. Shout out to Navarez for posting this. But yeah, so we're going to get into the 7 days battle, the battles of 7 days. We're going to do Vicksburg, and then we're going to... Iwo Jima is still on the books at some point. The Battle of the Bulge from World War II is on here at some point. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which will be like a 40-hour fucking podcast series. The history of Rome. I've recently been getting into Rome. God, I'm just rambling at this point, but, you know, if you're sticking around, thank you so much. God bless you. But yeah, so I have so many different directions I want to go in this, and I don't know exactly how to focus myself at times. So, like I said, hopefully over the next couple months, I'm able to pump out, you know, 5 or 6 more of these, but we'll see. No promises are made. Enjoy the smooth jazz music, and have a wonderful day. Look after yourself. Take it easy. And, hey, namaste.